Alex Belfield, Narcissist. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Those of you who are in the United Kingdom will undoubtedly have heard of the recent conviction and imprisonment of a former BBC radio presenter, Alex Belfield, who also had a substantial presence on YouTube. Those of you who are not from the United Kingdom may have no idea who I'm talking about, but I would invite you to continue to listen, because learning about Mr. Belfield and his behaviour proves instructive in understanding more about why he does as he does and what he may be. By way of background, a former BBC radio presenter was found guilty of stalking 4 people, including broadcaster Jeremy Vine, who is pretty well known in the United Kingdom, and Mr. Belfield has been jailed for 5.5 years. The interesting thing with his case was he never physically had anything to do with his victims with regard to the stalking. He didn't follow them around in person. He didn't drive alongside them as they were walking along the road. He didn't stand outside their house staring into their living room window. His stalking was all done through technology, by talking about his victims, by emailing them, by repeatedly making reference to them, detail which I'll be providing you with. There are those that think that his sentence for 5.5 years was rather harsh, making reference to people who've committed what they would regard as more serious crimes, for instance, rape or physical assault, receiving lesser sentences. However, a reading of the judge's sentencing remarks, something that I will be doing in due course, will cause you to realise why that sentence was handed down to him. There are those that think that Mr. Belfield is some kind of martyr, that he has exposed some kind of conspiracy of behaviours and unlawful practices at the BBC. That was not the case. He simply was no longer employed or contracted by them and didn't like that fact. And this then precipitated a course of behaviour which caused him to run foul of the law. Mr. Belfield is something of a motor mouth and is able to pick up an issue and talk about it, no doubt something that served him well in his days as a radio presenter. Also, during lockdown, the COVID situation, his following increased as his ability as the self-proclaimed voice of reason garnered quite a number of audience members and subscribers for his numerous YouTube videos, which were released on a daily basis. He would talk about a variety of subjects which resonated with individuals. However, some of his material then turned in a darker nature with regard to the people that became his victims. There are many who support him who think that he's been done to in a harsh fashion and that he's there as some kind of free speech martyr. Following the trial, and of course the judge's sentencing remarks, would divest all but the most ardent of supporters of that view. His is an interesting case because it demonstrates a range of behaviours that are worth examining to understand, is this the case of an individual who is a narcissist? Belfield, who, following no longer being a BBC presenter, ran a YouTube channel, and he stalked his victims by harassing them online. His trial heard, he made YouTube videos about them, posted messages on social media, sent emails, and he also encouraged his followers to target them. In one instance, there's video footage of him calling, under a separate name, a presenter called Ian Lee, and behaving in an unpleasant fashion towards him, ridiculing him and belittling him. Mr. Lee has released his own videos talking about the impact of this behaviour upon him. The judge said one of his victims came close to killing himself. Belfield had harassed this victim, BBC Radio Northampton presenter Bernard Spedding, for 9 years, and some of his followers had sent him death threats. He was seconds away from taking his own life as a result of your conduct, the judge, Mr. Justice Saini, told Belfield. You made this highly successful and confident radio presenter lose all joy in life and turned him into a shell. The judge said that while Belfield did not physically approach or watch his victims, the effects were just as damaging. The stalking you committed was not the conventional type which is popularised in the press, he said. Your methods were, however, just as effective as a way of intimidating your victims, and were in many ways much harder to deal with. The judge said he agreed with some of the witnesses in the case who said Belfield had weaponised the internet. Belfield, who is 42 and from Nottingham, was originally charged with stalking 8 different people who were mostly current or former BBC staff. The full wording of the charges stated he pursued a course of conduct that amounted to harassment of the complainants, which amounted to stalking and caused them serious alarm or distress. He was found guilty of this offence in relation to 2 of the complainants, Mr. Spedding, who is known as Bernie Keith, and videographer Ben Hewis. For each of these charges, he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison to run consecutively. The judge said Belfield bombarded Mr. Spedding, who had previously been friends with Belfield, with Facebook messages and emails, and made highly abusive YouTube videos containing false allegations. He had no escape from you, the judge told Belfield. The judge said it was an aggravating factor that Belfield's harassment was public, as this caused his social media followers to also abuse Mr. Spedding over a lengthy period. In some cases, this was extended to death threats. Victim personal statements were not read out in court, but Mr. Hewis tweeted his after the sentencing. From his very first email, and in the majority of communications thereafter, he used my wife and children as his main weapon to terrify, intimidate, and blackmail me, he wrote. Blocking was also a futile exercise, as Belfield continued to seek out new ways to get to me when others failed. When blocked on Twitter, he used other accounts to see what I was tweeting, and routinely publicly mocked me to his social media followers, posting screen grabs he could only obtain by using an account that I had not blocked. In relation to Jeremy Vine and theatre blogger Philip Dehaney, Belfield was found guilty of 2 lesser offences of simple stalking, which does not require serious alarm or distress to be proved. For each of these offences, he was sentenced to 13 weeks, also to run consecutively. The judge said Belfield had made wholly false allegations about Mr. Vine stealing £1,000 of BBC licence payers' money in a video which was viewed by more than 400,000 people. You were not a whistleblower in any sense, but developed a fixation with pursuing Mr. Vine with a campaign of abuse, the judge said. Belfield also published Mr. Vine's address to a mass audience, the judge said. Although you at no stage committed any physical acts, Mr. Vine considered himself and his family to be at risk from you and his followers, the judge told Belfield. He had to ask his family to watch out for you and to take care in and around their home address. Belfield was found not guilty of stalking Rosina Breen, Liz Green, Helen Thomas and Stephanie Hurst. Ms. Breen had been his boss at BBC Radio Leeds. Miss Green had been a fellow radio presenter. Ms. Thomas had been Miss Breen's boss. Ms. Hurst joined BBC Radio Leeds as a presenter after Belfield left. The judge made restraining orders in relation to all of the complainants, including those Belfield was not convicted of stalking. In relation to the women, the judge said each of them suffered a campaign of harassment by email and social media communications. Each of them suffered serious mental health problems arising from Mr. Belfield's conduct. The judge explained he did not question the verdicts of the jurors, but was applying the civil standard of proof when making the restraining orders. Miss Breen tweeted that she was glad to finally have justice after 10 years. Despite 4 women not securing guilty verdicts, today's custodial sentences are a welcome relief, she wrote. Stalking is a crime, horrific, vicious, cowardly. The verdicts, in relation to each complainant in the order they appeared on the indictment, were Rosina Breen, not guilty, Liz Green, not guilty, Helen Thomas, not guilty, Stephanie Hurst, not guilty, Bernard Spedding, guilty majority verdict, Ben Hewis, guilty unanimous verdict, Philip Dehaney, not guilty to the charge on the indictment, but guilty of the alternative charge of simple stalking, majority verdict. Jeremy Vine, not guilty to the charge on the indictment, but guilty of the alternative charge of simple stalking, unanimous verdict. In mitigation, Barrister David Aubrey, KC, said Belfield had not intended to cause his victims distress, but could now see that he had. He now has developed the insight that he didn't have before, Mr. Aubrey said. He said he could see their distress in court and feels deeply sorry for what he did. The judge told Belfield he will serve up to half of his sentence in prison and the remainder on licence. He warned him he could then be recalled to prison if he commits a further offence. This gives you some background to the behaviours that were engaged in. It's also been the case that Belfield has been accused of trying to take money or taking money from his supporters and subscribers for the purposes of a defence fund, but then represented himself in court during the trial. Might be this the case that he has sought to defraud individuals, or is he going to make repayment of the monies that he's obtained? Some people commented about the fact that he was showing in his YouTube videos that he was on holiday, and that he was buying expensive items. Was this the case, that he was using money which had been donated to him for his defence fund to spend on himself? And what would that say about him? There's a wealth of material about Alex Belfield, and there are many videos about the outcome and what people think in relation to this. I will be examining the material to make a determination as to whether this individual is somebody who is a narcissist, and does the evidence support that. I would encourage those of you who might not know anything about the case to observe and watch the videos, because it will help you understand more about the process of assessment of determining whether somebody is a narcissist, and also expose you to a range of behaviours that this individual has engaged in following a conviction at a Crown Court in the United Kingdom. I'd also direct you to watch the video, The Narcissist and Stalking, to understand more about the mentality of the people that engage in such behaviour and why it occurs. Therefore, look out for the next video, which will be determining what Alex Belfield is and why. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.